Just about to begin. If I could at this point please remind you to switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent so we don't have ringing and tringing. I can see everyone grabbing their bags, so it was a good reminder. On behalf of the Sydney Jewish Museum, I welcome you and I call on our CEO, Mr. Norman Seligman, to do the official welcome. Thank you.
Holocaust survivors, Rabbonim, honoured guests, family members, ladies and gentlemen. Aviv's already told you who I am, so I don't have to introduce myself. But on behalf of the museum, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to the launch of Francine Lazarus' book, A Hidden Jewish Child from Belgium. The museum is proud to be able to provide a forum for these significant stories to be told, and we congratulate Francine on her book, and we're delighted with the fact that you've chosen the museum as a place to launch it. So thank you, Francine. A special welcome to Professor Marie Bashir, formerly the Governor of New South Wales, who will officially launch the book. Welcome, Professor. And also to Holocaust survivor Francine Lazarus and her many family members that are here. Very proud, from what I can see. And also, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we have a number of Holocaust survivors here today. Welcome to everybody. At this juncture, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge and give thanks to the elders and traditional custodians who've cared for this land for thousands of years. May we walk with care on this land that sustains the spirit of these people and which has provided a home for our Jewish community. The Sydney Jewish Museum is many things. It's a museum. It's a memorial site to the 6 million who were murdered during the Holocaust. And it's also a major educational institution. In the last year, we educated roughly 25,000 school students, of whom probably 90% are not Jewish. And in addition, about 25,000 adult visitors as well. And over a typical year, we probably run about 100 events at the museum, similar to what we have here today. So about 2 events a week. And our operations manager, Viva Wolf, I don't know where she's gone suddenly, but she was here. Viva right there. She certainly has a major hand in most of those activities. So welcome to all of you. We also act as a forum for many cultural events in the community, book launches, music events, and so on, and lectures by local and world-renowned speakers. We've recently refurbished the Holocaust sections of the museum, and we've created something that I think the whole community can be extremely proud of. We are certainly getting excellent feedback from all our visitors, whether they're local or international. So if you haven't yet been into the museum and had a look, I urge you to do so. If not this afternoon, do come back. You probably need about a whole day to see it anyway. In addition to that, we have 4 temporary exhibitions going as well right now. We have the 100th anniversary of the Lighthorse at Bashir. That's next door in the military exhibition. We have an exhibition called Stand Up in the main part of the museum on the ground floor. We have one on the righteous amongst the nations. And right up at the top of the museum, we've one called Closer, Portraits of Survival, which pays tribute to the 44 Holocaust survivors currently volunteering at the museum. That's in addition to our normal stuff that we have. So please do come round and take a look at everything. It's now my pleasure to introduce our honoured guest for this afternoon. Professor Marie Bashir is the former and second longest serving Governor of New South Wales. She was born in Arandora, New South Wales, and graduated from the University of Sydney Medical School in 1956, and has held various medical positions in the years thereafter, with a particular focus on psychiatry. She also served as the Chancellor of Chancellor of Sydney University from 2007 till 2012. In early 2001, she was appointed by the Queen as the Governor of New South Wales, and her appointment was welcomed on both sides of the political spectrum. And an editorial in the Sydney Morning Herald at the time noted that she would be a powerful advocate for the powerless. And certainly, in her many years in office, she certainly proved them to be totally correct. In 2014, she was made a Dame of the Order of Australia. And I'd like to just read part of the citation, which said, "For extraordinary and preeminent achievement and service to medicine, international relations, tertiary education, and to the people of New South Wales." She retired on the 1st of October 2014 and was succeeded as Governor by General David Hurley. As it happens, we had a function this morning, the Anzac function here this morning, and General Hurley was probably sitting in the exact same seat that you're sitting in right now. So we've had both the Governor and the former Governor in the museum today. So that's an incredible honour for us and for the whole community. If Wikipedia can be trusted, then, by the way, I think it's the gospel, personally, then Professor Bashir celebrated her 60th wedding anniversary only about a month ago. So Mazal Tov to you and to Sir Nicholas Shahedi on that incredible milestone. Professor Bashir is a great friend of the Sydney Jewish Museum, and she enjoyed a close relationship with one of our founding members and a long-time board member, the late Mrs. Marika Weinberger. Even while she was governor, she privately and quietly visited the museum on at least 2 occasions that I'm aware of, where we were just going to the museum, she says probably more, where I would go into the museum and there she was, she'd paid her entrance fee and she was just wandering through the museum. So didn't want any special attention or whatever. She's been a phenomenal friend, so thank you very much. Not only to the museum, but to the whole Jewish community. We were delighted when we offered Professor Bashir honorary life membership of the museum in 2014, which he accepted, so thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to ask you to welcome, and I'm going to use the official terminology, the Honourable Dame Marie Bashir. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear Mr. Seligman, if I could say so, thank you for that most generous and warm welcome. For me, it is an unbound privilege to be here with you all again today as we gather to celebrate the launch of a book which I believe will become a classic of literature in Australia, certainly, and far beyond. And they're no idle words, because most of you I know will read that book, that wonderful book. So what an honour it is to be here with you all today. Rabbi Ben Elton of the Great Synagogue of Sydney, Mr. Seligman, of course, and our beloved author Francine Lazarus, and so many of her dear husband and many family members. Aviva Wolf, events manager of the museum, and Holocaust survivors. What can I say to you? I will later mention why this is engraved so deeply on my heart, your suffering. And let me say, there are some dear young people here. It's lovely to see the young picking up the feelings, going forward. You know, one of the great phrases in the English language that I love are those 3 words, lest we forget. We must never forget. And that very much applies to what Francine has honoured us with, her story, which affected so many. So, dear friends and colleagues, it's a privilege indeed to join you all this afternoon for the launch of a most moving and significant history of a little girl and her inspiring life story, a hidden Jewish child from Belgium. Yes, indeed, an exceptional child endowed with exceptional resilience and an inner beauty, which, and these are my feelings, my words, which will surely affect all who encounter her. Encounter her whether through this book or through the privilege of knowing her and learning, as the book's subheading foreshadows, survival, scars and healing. And I too, as a little girl growing up in Narrandera with the Aboriginal children, affirm my deep respect for the traditional custodians of our land. Here it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, but right across our land, those wonderful first Australians, longest living culture and civilisation on the planet, treated the earth as their mother with great respect. And we're living through good times where we're seeing, if I could use a biblical phrase, the mote removed from the eyes of the wider population, now appreciating the wisdom and the depth of understanding of our Aboriginal people. Well, I'd like to thank Norman again, Mr. Seligman, and the directors of this very, very special place, the Sydney Jewish Museum, dear to my heart over many years, which will forever provide a place where people even beyond the Jewish community of Sydney and Australia and beyond, any people can come and reflect upon the past especially of our lifetime, of things that we hope by our understanding of them will never, ever, ever be encountered again. And certainly that evil was something that must never be forgotten. Well, our author, Francine Lazarus, her maiden name Kamaman, has dedicated this most important personal history, understandably to her dear children, but also in memory of her beloved father, Israel Kamaman, who was born in 1897 in Poland. Poland then was a nation within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Francine, without being too personal or crossing personal borders, I'd like to say, reading about your father, your love for him, his courage and bravery, I felt as I read through this wonderful book like a little daughter to him too. I really did. And that's the personal strength of this book, which I'm sure so many, if not all of you, will feel. Francine shares with us memories of a most beloved and courageous and inspirational man who in 1944, like so many fine and innocent individuals of that period in European history, that dreadful chapter, died in the nefarious Auschwitz concentration prison. Auschwitz, as I know, having travelled there myself some years ago, to be more deeply able to share the sorrow of my beloved Jewish friends from school days. Yes, Auschwitz stands as a never-to-be-forgotten chapter in the history of mankind, a chapter of man's incredible inhumanity to man. And I will say, as I walked through that lane into where the exhibits were portrayed, there was one of suitcases, some of you may have seen, with stencilled names. Then there was one of photographs of children arriving to be sorted. And I'm not saying this to impress you, but the tall child standing alongside the little ones with long plaits and a sallow complexion seemed to be the living image of myself at the age of 13, 14. So one can certainly identify very strongly with the events of that terrible period I was going to say this century, it wasn't so long ago, the last century. And certainly in Francine's sensitive dedication and acknowledgements, she also recalls those caring Belgian people who aided her survival. Indeed, Francine's exceptional account of that period in her life unfolds to our awareness how such an exceptional experience of catastrophic loss, of terrorism, such as she endured, how it can be felt and retained by a very young child. She's told me also that relatives have aided, some of the memories of the past, but certainly that is way in which I felt so deeply, I would say, identifying very much with what she went through. Not that I had ever experienced anything like it, but one could feel the pain, the terror, the fear of an innocent and most beautiful child. And like very precious jewels, she's provided a most meticulous and extensive family tree of the major branches of her family. Inberg Rosenheim, Lazarus Isaacs, Kammermann Schillinger, extending well over a century to most recent years. So who knows, in looking through that family tree, you may find some relatives with which you share links of love, of memory. And I'm sure that many of us gathered here this afternoon can readily identify with the feelings in her words expressed by young Francine when she says, "Nazis ruled the first 6.5 years of my life. Memories of the ensuing events would dominate the next 70 years. And also inside me, I built up a very, very guilty feeling of why I had survived when the Nazis killed more than 1.5 million children in Belgium." I mean, the statistics are almost, the reality, I shouldn't call them statistics, are almost beyond our capacity to internalise. I'd also like to note that the foreword to this unique and sensitive personal history, which was written by Dr. Margaret McNiven, also alerts us to the immense dimensions of suffering endured in that time. She notes, if following generations are to understand the Holocaust and the bravery of the survivors, this book will be a worthwhile educational tool. It is a remarkable and timeless story. So Francine begins this great work by introducing us to her family, a Jewish family in Brussels. Their happiness suddenly diverted into a life of fear and danger. You can tell from the chapter headings, indeed, the immense dimensions of her experience. Hiding from Hitler, hiding alone, my father arrested, waiting for my father, not wanted. Father took her to a farm of Christian people where they cared for her, but she felt, I'll read bits of that again, like a total foreign stranger. Different people, different animals. One can readily identify with this. A servant at that family. Education denied. Here a highly, I may say this as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a highly intelligent youngster being denied education. Imagine the thirst for that and wondering, was my father still alive? And then finally resuming her education. The family becoming reunited in Australia and ending what had been intergenerational victimisation for innocent, wonderful people in a free land. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just share a few of Francine's words. May I, Francine, with our dear friends here. She says, only 4 years old, I felt deposited like a parcel with people whom I did not know. I was disoriented, as I had only known the streets of Brussels, instead of being with my family and my loving father. I was living in a remote farmhouse with strangers and their animals, feeling very upset, thinking of someone, a child of 4, feeling very upset. Why was I abandoned? When would my father return and where were the rest of my family? I felt abandoned and distraught. Dwork summed up the feeling, which I shared with many other Jewish people in Belgium, of having, and I quote, a fundamental lack of comprehension of why they were forced to leave their homes, their families and their friends. My crying must have gone on for days, and following many reprimands, I was slapped for punishment and deterrence. Perhaps these farmers were afraid that the Nazis could have heard about a sobbing child, or that collaborators who knew they were childless would report them. So there were collaborators who would say, oh, why have they got a child there, you know? So there were all of these incredible dangers indeed. And certainly there was the being there with the family and so forth. She says, while she was there, years later, got a job having to work in the markets. And while I worked on the markets, Minnie paid women to look after her baby. And they stayed with the family that Francine was staying with. One had a wooden leg that creaked, and which, to my horror, she took off at night. Imagine a youngster. Imagine. She was extremely smelly, and I had to sleep in the same bed as her. I hated her, but not as much as the second woman who arrived with a big cage with a parrot in it that commanded attention. She fed the parrot by putting bits of biscuit between her lips, and the parrot would grab the food. One day she showed Minnie 2 of her old dresses that she'd cut up with scissors, but she claimed that I had done it, and then demanded compensation. Minnie believed her, though I swore repeatedly that I was not responsible. I wanted revenge on that woman who lied, but I didn't have the courage to act on my anger. So these are just some of the aspects of this incredible story. There are the dramatic aspects, of course. And then, of course, a kind woman came in on the scene and was instrumental in giving help to Jewish people. And guess what her profession was? She ran a house, a bordello. In the public's view, Madame Jules ran a cafe and hotel called Pax Taverne, located at 2 Rue des Boitards, parallel to Fossé aux Loups, not far from my grandparents' house. In fact, she ran a bordello. Her husband, Monsieur Jules de Haine, engaged Zeta to make his custom suit. That's grandfather, isn't it? Yes, her grandfather. Madame Jules became highly significant for our family during the war, as I discovered later from Charlie being Francine's brother. Among her investments, she owned a house at 26 Avenue du Couronnet in Woluwe-Saint-Lambert. Above the top floor of this 2-storey house, there was an attic comprising a large room serving as a kitchen and living room, and 2 bedrooms. And there Madame Jules was able to hide Jewish families escaping from that cruelty that surely will never be repeated in the history of the world. So you can see, as well as there being the tragedy, the historical record, this wonderful book is intensely personal, with vignettes of so many different individuals, including, as I say, the lady who ran the bordello, who will win a place in your hearts forever, I'm sure. Well, then, of course, getting together with all of the family, hope of coming one day to Australia, and then certainly looking back over the past, research for this wonderful book. As Francine says, she wanted to find all the people who somehow or other had been instrumental in her survival. In adulthood, I wanted to thank every one of them for saving me. I wanted to shout out every name and to recognise every person who helped my family and me. Now I long to nominate everyone for recognition. If only I knew each person's name. You know, a child bundled along. Jews recognised and honoured people who were instrumental in saving lives, formalised in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as the recognition order called the Righteous Among Nations. By the 1st of January 2016, not so long ago, 1,707 Belgians had been awarded the distinction of Righteous Among the Nations by the State of Israel for risking their lives to save Jewish people from persecution during the occupation. And Francine herself was certainly dedicated to that. Over the years, I, meaning Francine, contacted several organisations for details about my hiding places between my 4th and 6th years of life. So far, results have been sparse. All I knew was that someone was orchestrating my constant movement between safe houses. Gives you some faith in humanity, doesn't it, when you read that very sentence. Each time I heard of another resistant heroine or read a child survivor's tale of reunion with a rescuer, I immediately grasped any facts, like falling leaves, to examine if I could have been in the same position, the same house, with the same rescuer taking me to the next house. Given that the Nazis had issued orders to kill the entire family of anyone caught aiding a Jewish person, I was struck by how deeply committed my rescuers were in saving their lives. That insight heightened my sense of guilt and loss that I never thanked the people who hid me at enormous risk to themselves and their families. Francine, dear, I'm sure they knew of your immense gratitude. Well, 18 years later, after leaving Belgium, Francine did return for a visit with her Australian husband, Philip, who's with us too. 35 years beforehand, in 1942, Brussels was indeed a killing ground for Jewish people and others condemned by the Nazis. At one stage, you know, this exquisite little girl, 4 to 6, hid on the roof, on the tiles of the roof, in constant danger of falling off. That's where she'd been placed by her rescuers in order that she not in any way be found. So she went back to Saint, catching a train to Tubize and then a taxi, and so much seemed unchanged. Well, she shared these memories and details with us. And I, who have been reading books, if you'll excuse my immodesty, for at least 75 years, I can't remember any that's touched me more deeply than this. And I consider it a profound honour that Francine asked me to launch it this afternoon in the presence of all of you. And as I said before, an honour, a deeply felt privilege to stand amongst survivors of the Holocaust. You might say, well, why do you feel like that, Murray? Well, because when I first went to high school, I came down from Narandra and went to a very wonderful public high school. 1943, I was in Year 7. Most of my dearest friends in that class were children of Jewish families who just managed to get out. My dearest friend to this day, her grandfather had been one of the Germans of Jewish background. He was Jewish faith, who'd written the Constitution for Germany after World War I. Her father had served in the German army, but because her grandmother was of the Jewish faith, their name was on the list for the Gestapos. And one courageous person who saw that list in the office one night came to their home in Karlsruhe and said, please, please get out. Get out, they're coming tomorrow. So the parents, 3 boys, and my beloved friend, the only girl in the family, she says she'll never forget as they rushed away and crossed the river. Her father threw his medals from World War I into the river. And it was the sensitisation by these friends in that year, 7 of whom, my dearest friends, and those of us still alive, still very much in communication and love. That sensitised any child who hears these stories can not fail to be sensitised to the propensity for man's inhumanity to man. And we must all be vigilant. I'm sure I don't have to say that in this company, vigilant, that we never ever stand by and allow these things to happen again. So it's with the greatest sense of humility and privilege, Francine, that I thank you for this contribution to world history. That's what I believe it is. And certainly a most important, beautiful and touching contribution to, if I dare say, Australian literature. And thank you for your immense courage, your resilience, and the model that you are and will be to anyone who reads this book. Thank you all. Thank you.
On behalf of my grandmother and all my family, we'd like to thank you with this gift.
Oh, thank you. You're just beautiful. Oh, thank you. You go there first.
It's now time for us, Francine's children, to say a few words by way of introduction. As the family was discussing at Shabbat dinner on Friday night, it's an important day for our family as well as for Mum herself. Mum is so deserving of acclaim here, not just because she has achieved in writing this book, which has been a long and arduous process for her, but also because of what it stands for. Mum has overcome much adversity and unfairness in her life, and she has given so much of herself to others, a lot of the time to her own detriment. She has been the most loving mother, even though she did not experience always the same love and affection from her own mother in her formative years.
We have always known this, but now have a much more profound appreciation since reading her life story. Mum is strong, resourceful, intelligent, and most of all, resilient. But it was not always thus. Just look at the frightened girl on the cover of the book, clutching her father's hand, a picture of innocence and dependence. In essence, this book is about what happens when the central figure in her life was taken from her, and she was more or less left to fend for herself at the age of 6.
This book represents an outstanding achievement, a labour of love pursued with great determination over the last 3 years. It has been much more than a cathartic experience for Mum. Assisting in the editing of earlier drafts of the work has helped us to understand her better and to appreciate that the subtleties of her character are more than a little influenced by her upbringing and the experiences related in the book. I know I speak for my siblings when I say that we've never been prouder of our mum than today. And it's not just the fact that we can now claim to have a published author in the family, although that achievement should not be underrated. It is that, as Dame Marie has said so eloquently, Mum's book is making a significant contribution to the body of work on the topic of hidden children and on the Holocaust more generally. It is impossible to under-emphasise the importance of books such as Mum's. So if you could all please welcome the lady of the moment to the stage.
Thank you all for coming here today to support me in this momentous event in my life. I'm grateful to Professor Marie Bashir for the wonderful and generous words that she has said about me and praised my book. Thank you. I'm happy that the museum has kindly agreed for this event to take place in the magnificent newly refurbished museum, and I urge you to come back and take a few hours and visit. Thank you to Aviva, to all the work you've done behind the scenes and your advice. A quotation from the Mishnah Sanhedrin says, "Whomsoever saves a life saves the entire world." I owe my life to so many selfless, brave, generous people. The Nazis applied collective punishment so that whoever helped a Jew was, if caught, not only severely punished, but their family was too. They were risking so much. And yet, so many unknown people were involved in my rescue. Now, sadly and regretfully, I'm not able to have them recognized as righteous amongst the nations. The only recognition I can give them is in my heart. Some years ago, when I decided to undertake the museum guide course, one of our educators was the wonderful Avril Alba, who encouraged me to write my story. A while later, I showed my 10,000 work to Jackie Vasilevsky, the project manager of community stories at the museum. Jackie was very helpful and supportive. Thank you, Jackie, wherever you are. It was she who first suggested I either get my 10,000 words bound up and give it to my children and grandchildren, but if I wanted a wider audience, I'd have to write some more. Here it is. What spurred me on was the knowledge that 1.5 million children had been murdered, and that I was one of the few that were saved, and therefore I had to publish. I am not presumptuous to dare say that I speak on their behalf. However, by telling only a minute part of Holocaust history, I am perhaps giving them a voice, theirs having been so brutally extinguished. Zachor, remember, is an injunction to the Jews to remember what Amalek did to our people, and so it's inculcated into our psyche. We must remember. Another tyrant rose in our time. We must never forget the memory of our lost people and the horror perpetrated against them. To publish this book, I've had much help from so many people, too many to name here. I'll just mention my Australian editor, Dr. Margaret McNiven, and my wonderful brother, Charlie Kammerman, who filled some gaps in my memory and told me invaluable stories about our father that I was too young to remember. I researched archives in Poland, Germany, Russia, the Ukraine, but the best treasure trove came from the Belgian authorities, who kept obsessive records on foreigners. Both my parents had immigrated separately to Belgium, but neither had obtained Belgian citizenship. Therefore, Their every movement was observed and recorded. They moved from one address to another, their applications for various permits, admissions to hospitals. Unfortunately, I have no record of my mother's until she arrived in Belgium in 1929. I tried to obtain a birth certificate. She had various official documents stating 3 different birth dates. I was told that Jewish records in Poland, where she was born, were usually kept at the synagogue and not at the official registry of the local town. During the war, the Nazis arrived in a town or village, gathered the Jews, and forced them into the synagogue, barred the doors, and set the synagogue on fire, burning the Jews, their prayer books, and their records, and leaving no trace of them ever having existed. Many synagogue and countless innocent people were destroyed in this way. I was born in Belgium on the day of the Anschluss. The Nazis invaded Belgium on the 10th May 1940. I was barely 2 years old. They soon proclaimed a series of edicts, one harsher than the previous one, each targeting and isolating the Jews from the general population. They were excluded from most professions. They had curfews imposed on them. Jewish businesses could not sell to non-Jews, dramatically shutting off most avenues of earning a living. It was those Jews who had managed to escape occupied countries who made us aware of the terrible ways that Jews were being treated, and that the resettlement to the east was but a subterfuge. The Nazis' objective was to torture and kill all the Jews of Europe. The Nazis had set up an organization called Association des Juifs en Belgique, Association of Jews in Belgium, which was completely under its control. Jews were ordered to register all details of their family, their homes, any property, all their possessions in exact detail, including silverware, musical instruments, rugs, jewelry, anything of value. Unbeknown to the Jewish population, these registrations made it easy to find them, come and arrest them, and send them to the death camps. The Nazis, or their helpers, were then able to collect all their possessions following the inventory supplied. Here started the first quandary: to register and get food coupons, or to go underground, disappear. Both my father and maternal grandfather registered. I have copies of the documents they completed, courtesy of the Belgian Police des Étrangers, Foreigners Police. The roundups started in earnest in Brussels in 1942. Trucks would block off both ends of a street, and the soldiers would run into the houses, dragging out the hapless Jews indiscriminately. Families were separated. Some terrified people were beaten in this process, especially if they weren't fast to move. They were then loaded on the trucks and transported to Malines, a little town conveniently located halfway between Brussels and Antwerp. It had a train line adequate for traffic to the east. It had a vacant barrack previously used by the Belgian army, very suitable for the Nazi purpose. It was almost impossible to find hiding places due to the ferocious reprisals if caught. Somehow, a place was found for me on a farm in Saintes, where I stayed for nearly 18 months until the Gestapo, which was the Nazi secret police, descended on the farm. Shots were fired, there was blood. I never saw my rescuers again. I was returned to Brussels somehow. I cannot remember how, but I have a very strong memory of my father grabbing and hiding me in the doorway as we were walking along a street near my grandparents' house. It could have been at my return, I don't know. From then on, it became a game of cat and mouse, of daily escape, of many different beds and many different carers. In these so-called safe houses, being hidden in insalubrious condition, I was riddled with lice and suffered from scabies and scurvy. My grandfather found a new hiding place for me with his accountant, and there I stayed almost until the liberation, when my brother came to collect me. In all this time, I do not remember having seen my mother. The bond had been irreparably broken. My father had been arrested and loaded onto the very last convoy out of Belgium to Auschwitz and murdered upon arrival. It took much time until we became aware of this awful truth, and even much longer to believe and accept it. Here is an extract from my book. Each day, Charlie and I walked to La Gare du Midi, the main train station in Brussels, to scan the list of names of returnees from the concentration camps. As he read each day's list, I asked over and over again, "Is our father on the train?" Silently, we looked at the survivors walking off or helped off the trains. They looked like living cadavers. Many of the weeping skeleton were still in the tattered striped clothes they had worn in the camps. To a young child, most seemed hideous and very frightening. Even for those reunited with family, there were no exuberant, joyful reunion. One prisoner said after her arrival home from Auschwitz, "I will not tell you anything because you would not believe all that I could tell you." In adulthood, I read about the gas chambers in which women, children, and men tried to cling to life for as long as possible. I've had nightmares in which I see my father trying to breathe air as his lungs exploded from the poisonous gas. Many survivors returning from the camps had nobody to meet them at the station, as no one else from their family had survived. We did not spare a moment to greet them as we focused on looking for our father. We wanted him to return and hoped that our lives would become better. Gradually, day after day, there were fewer and fewer returnees, and still my father did not arrive. Throughout childhood, I believed that he was only detained. Surely, he would soon return and make the world a safe and good place for me, as my father only could do. Of our family of 4, my dad did not survive. Sadly, he was not the only one. My paternal grandparents, whom I had never had the joy of knowing, countless aunts, uncles, cousins, all gone without a name, a photo, a record to remember them by. On my maternal side, the family in Poland was totally destroyed. My war did not finish with the liberation. My mother was unable or unwilling to care for Charlie and me. I was left with a series of carers, old couples in need of a few cents to top up their income, but not that much in need to tolerate an intractable girl, a loose cannon who misbehaved and was very rude. I exchanged carers on a regular basis. I did not start school until I was 8, an oversight by my mother. There was no permanence in my life. In between carers, I would sometimes land back with my maternal grandparents, and sometime at my mother Minnie's 3-room apartment, situated just outside the Parc de l'Archen where the king lived. My brother would care for me until other carers could be found. He used to cook the most delicious chips and on good day would top them with a fried egg. I thought Charlie was wonderful. He was the only person who cared for me. I was so hungry for food and for love. My mother remarried, and when my sister Helen was born, I was brought back to care for the child and do household duties. I was 11 years old and left for days on end in charge of a baby. I was also the maid of my grandparents, for whom I had to get fresh food daily as they had no refrigerator, clean the grate, bring up coal, start a new fire, empty the commodes because my grandparents were not able to go down a flight of stairs to the toilet. In between all these chores, I could go to school. However, my mother removed me under useless protest when I finished primary. She enrolled me in a typing school for 6 months so that I could start supporting myself. I was 13 years old. All my life, I wanted my mother to praise me, hug me, care for me. I would have done anything to deserve her love. I did all this and more to prove to her that I was a good girl, but I never had a sign of approval from either her or my grandmother, only reprimands and rebuffs. I cannot remember kindness from either of them or a word of praise. In voluntary shipment to Australia, falling in love with Sydney and in Sydney changed my complete perceptions of life. Sailing through the Heads on that unforgettable morning, I saw this beautiful city caressed by the first rays of sunshine, and I knew I had at last found my harbour. My mother, her husband and my sister came to Australia and a truce of sort was established. I created with my husband a beautiful family. I'm so blessed that all are here today to cheer me on, and I love them dearly. My sister came here today as well, and I see here my beloved brother who had been sent to Australia before me. In middle age, I finally could study and acquire the knowledge that I had always longed for. I had the street know-how, but now obtain a formal education. The framed degrees on the wall of my study prove it. After her husband died, my mother was alone again. With Charlie and Helen, I looked after her, and in the last few months of her life, as she was suffering from dementia, I went every day to see her in the hope that maybe once only she would say, "I love you." But she never did. Given that I was the lucky one who survived, could I blame the Holocaust for having had no childhood and no youth, when 1.5 million children had no life? However, I'm sometimes sad that I became old without ever having been young. And still, there is hope when I see my wonderful children and grandchildren. As Elie Wiesel said, just as man cannot live without dreams, he cannot live without hope. If dreams reflect the past, hope summons the future. Thank you. Oh, that way, okay. Do I leave that there?
It's going to be difficult for me to talk. I get very emotional after amazing, amazing talks like that. Francine, I can see why your book's going to be a bestseller, because your words are so eloquent, so beautifully put together, and evoke so many emotions that I can't wait to read this book. And the hard work you've put together. This museum has jewels, the jewels of the crown, and they are the Holocaust survivors who give us their time, who share their emotions, who pass on their wise words, who inspire and educate. And Francine, you certainly are a pearl amongst those jewels. We thank you for your time, your effort, And let me assure you, the love you may have lost in the past, you have certainly gained today, not only from all those at the museum, all the children who pass your route on their way, your wonderful family, your children and grandchildren. You certainly have much love to make up for lost times. Thank you all so much for being here today and for sharing in this very, very special moment for Francine. Thank you, Professor Bashir, for your beautiful and eloquent words as always. It's always a pleasure to have you at our museum. Please come and visit again. Please go through our beautiful new exhibition, which itself inspires so many emotions. Please buy Francine's book. Many of you already have. The rest will be on sale afterwards. I urge you to give another standing ovation to Francine. Well done and mazal tov.